The day the HOA went silent was the day I knew they were finally afraid. I bought 95 acres because I wanted peace, not another fight. But every morning, HOA security parked outside my fence, photographing barns they didn't own, cattle they couldn't control, and land that had never belonged to their subdivision. Then their president arrived carrying official-looking papers that felt wrong the moment I touched them. I trusted my instincts, started documenting everything, and uncovered a plan far bigger than anyone could have imagined. By the time a crashed drone revealed what they were really after, there was no turning back. Stay with me because this story only gets more unbelievable from here. And if stories about standing your ground with patience, evidence, and the law are your kind of stories, consider subscribing. We'd be glad to have you here for the next one. I bought 95 acres because I wanted silence. Not the kind of silence you find inside a city apartment with the windows closed. I mean the kind that comes from standing beside an old fence at sunrise, hearing cattle shift through the grass while the wind carries nothing except the creak of weathered posts and the distant rush of water from a mountain creek. After 25 years investigating environmental crimes for state and federal agencies, I had earned that silence. My name is Ethan Mercer. I'm 52 years old, divorced, and finally retired. For most of my career, I dealt with illegal dumping, forged permits, polluted rivers, and people who believed they were too powerful to obey the law. I spent decades documenting lies with cameras instead of arguments and evidence instead of anger. That's exactly why I chose this place. The ranch sat against the Wyoming foothills, just outside a small town where everyone seemed to know which roads disappeared into cattle country. My property stretched across rolling pasture, patches of pine timber, a spring-fed pond, and nearly half a mile of fencing that had stood long before I ever arrived. The western edge bordered public grazing land. The southern edge followed a county-maintained gravel road. The eastern line was marked by an aging barbed wire fence that separated my ranch from something entirely different. Cedar Hollow Estates. Brand new homes, perfect sidewalks, decorative stone entrances, fresh sod that looked imported from somewhere that had never seen a drought. They had an HOA. I didn't. That wasn't an accident. Before signing the purchase papers, I'd spent an entire afternoon reviewing the deed, county plats, easement records, and subdivision filings. My attorney probably thought I was paranoid. Maybe I was. Years of chasing fraud had taught me one simple lesson. Never trust what people say when the paperwork can tell the truth. Every document confirmed exactly what I wanted to see. My ranch had never belonged to Cedar Hollow Estates. It wasn't subject to their bylaws. It wasn't inside their boundaries. There were no shared roads, no shared utilities, no reciprocal easements. Legally speaking, the subdivision ended exactly where my fence began. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it became the beginning. The first week passed peacefully. I repaired broken fence posts, replaced rusted hinges on the main gate, walked every property line carrying nothing more than fencing pliers and a notebook. It felt good knowing every acre belonged to me and only me. The cattle settled in quickly. So did I. Then, on the 8th morning, I noticed the white SUV. It rolled slowly along the county road outside my eastern fence. No hurry, no destination, just creeping forward. It stopped opposite my equipment barn. A man wearing a dark polo shirt stepped out holding what looked like a tablet. He pointed it toward my buildings, tapped the screen several times, then climbed back into the vehicle and drove away. I assumed he worked for the subdivision. Curious neighbors existed everywhere. I thought nothing of it. The next morning there were 2 vehicles. This time they stopped near my cattle pond. One photographed the shoreline. The other zoomed a camera toward my fuel storage tank. Again, they left without speaking. By Friday, I had seen them 5 mornings in a row, always between 8 and 9, always driving slowly, always stopping at different locations outside my fence, always taking photographs. Curiosity eventually overcame politeness. Saturday morning, I climbed into my pickup and drove toward the eastern boundary. The white security cart arrived almost on schedule. It rolled beside the fence before stopping opposite me. The driver wore a badge stitched onto his shirt. Cedar Hollow Community Security. He smiled politely. Morning. Morning, I answered. You folks lose something? He looked briefly surprised. No, sir. Then why are you photographing my ranch? His smile never changed. Routine community patrol. Community? I asked. You don't patrol this community. He glanced toward the subdivision entrance. We're simply documenting surrounding properties. For what reason? I don't have that information. He said it so smoothly it almost sounded rehearsed. I waited. He waited. Finally, he nodded once. Have a good day, sir. The cart turned around and disappeared toward Cedar Hollow. I watched until it vanished behind the stone entrance sign. Something about the conversation bothered me. Not what he'd said. What he hadn't. People performing legitimate inspections usually explained themselves. People hiding their purpose rarely volunteered details. That afternoon, I walked the eastern fence again. Nothing had changed. The boundary markers remained exactly where county surveyors had placed them years earlier. The old barbed wire still separated my pasture from the HOA landscaping. No gates connected the properties. No roads crossed the line. Nothing justified repeated surveillance. Sunday morning brought something new. Instead of one security cart, there were 3. They parked 50 yards apart along the road. Each pointed cameras toward different sections of my ranch. One focused on my barn, another on my livestock, the third on my house. I stood on my porch watching them through binoculars. None of them looked at the subdivision. Every lens pointed only one direction. Toward me. Toward land their HOA did not own. Toward property they had absolutely no authority to inspect. I had spent 25 years recognizing patterns before crimes happened. As I lowered the binoculars, an uncomfortable certainty settled over me. This wasn't curiosity. Someone was collecting information. The only question left was why. I decided not to guess. Guessing had ruined more investigations than bad evidence ever had. Instead, I started documenting everything. The next morning, I mounted a dash camera inside my pickup before driving to the eastern fence line. A second camera faced the county road, recording anyone who stopped outside my property. Every encounter received a timestamp, GPS location, and written note in the same leather notebook I'd carried for years. If this ever ended up in court, memory wouldn't matter. Records would. Around 9 o'clock, 3 white security carts appeared again. This time they didn't leave. A black SUV pulled in behind them, polished enough to reflect the Wyoming sky. A woman stepped out wearing a tailored navy jacket, sunglasses, and the kind of confidence that comes from believing rules exist for everyone except herself. She walked directly toward my gate, without asking permission. "I'm Vanessa Caldwell," she announced before I could speak. "President of Cedar Hollow Estates." I remained beside the closed gate. "Ethan Mercer. I know who you are." That answer caught my attention. "We've been trying to introduce ourselves," she continued with a practiced smile. "Our community places a high value on neighborhood safety. My neighborhood seems safe. It is because we keep it that way." She gestured toward the security officers waiting behind her. "As president, I need to schedule a routine inspection of your property." I looked at her for several seconds. "My property?" "Yes." "Why?" She reached into a leather portfolio and removed several neatly organized documents. Our legal counsel has advised us that neighboring parcels affecting Cedar Hollow fall under Temporary Community Inspection Authority regarding environmental hazards, drainage, wildfire mitigation, and visual compliance. She slid the paperwork through the gate. I'll need access to your barns, pond, fuel storage, and fencing. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I read. Years earlier, I'd spent countless hours examining forged permits dumped on inspectors' desks by companies trying to avoid responsibility. Counterfeit paperwork always had one weakness: details. The county seal on Vanessa's packet was outdated by almost 4 years. One statute cited had been renumbered after a legislative revision. The signature block listed an official who had retired long before Cedar Hollow was ever built. Individually, they were small mistakes. Together, they destroyed the document's credibility. I looked back up. Who prepared these? Our attorneys. Which firm? They represent the association. I asked for a name. Her smile stiffened. They're fully qualified. I'm sure they are. I calmly photographed every page with my phone. One security officer shifted uneasily. Vanessa noticed. Mr. Mercer, refusing an inspection could create unnecessary complications. I haven't refused anything. You haven't agreed. I haven't verified your authority. The documents explain our authority. They explain someone's imagination. For the first time, her expression cracked. I'm trying to resolve this cooperatively. So am I. I folded the copies and handed them back through the gate. When the county recorder tells me Cedar Hollow owns this ranch, I'll gladly invite you inside. Her jaw tightened. You may be misunderstanding your obligations. I don't have obligations to an HOA I never joined. Silence settled between us. One of the security officers quietly lowered his tablet. Another stopped taking photographs. Vanessa adjusted her sunglasses and stepped closer. Our community has invested millions of dollars beside your property. Congratulations. We expect neighboring landowners to cooperate. I expect them to respect boundary lines. For several long seconds, neither of us moved. Then she nodded once, though it looked more like a warning than agreement. This conversation isn't over. I didn't think it was. She returned to the SUV. Before climbing inside, she turned toward one of the officers. Continue documenting everything. She spoke softly. Not softly enough. The vehicles pulled away one after another, leaving nothing behind except tire tracks in the gravel. I stood beside the gate for another minute before taking my phone from my pocket again. Every photograph I'd taken was immediately backed up. Then I called exactly one person. Sheriff Daniel Brooks answered on the second ring. Daniel, it's Ethan. Everything all right? I just had an HOA president hand me inspection papers that don't survive 5 minutes of legal review. There was a pause. Then his voice became noticeably more serious. Don't throw those documents away. I wasn't planning to. Good. Why? Because if they're as bad as you think they are, he said quietly. This stopped being a neighborhood disagreement the moment she handed them to you. Sheriff Daniel Brooks didn't waste words. I'll stop by this afternoon. He arrived just after lunch in an unmarked county pickup. We sat at the tailgate of mine while he studied the photographs I'd taken of Vanessa's inspection packet. He didn't say much at first. He simply zoomed in on the county seal, the signatures, and the statute references. Finally, he looked up. You were right, I figured. No county office issued these. You recognize the signature? The man retired almost 5 years ago. Daniel handed my phone back. Don't accuse anyone yet. Let them keep talking. People making up authority usually can't stop using it. That advice stayed with me. Over the next several days, Cedar Hollow's interest in my ranch only grew. The security carts no longer drove past once each morning. Now they appeared 3 or 4 times a day. Different officers, different vehicles, same routine. They photographed my barns, my equipment shed, the diesel tank beside my workshop, even my cattle. One afternoon, I watched a security officer kneel beside the county road, aiming a telephoto lens through my fence toward the serial numbers on my tractor. He wasn't admiring the scenery. He was inventorying my property. I documented every visit, every license plate, every timestamp, every face. The notebook on my kitchen table grew thicker by the day. Then the drones appeared. The first one crossed over my eastern fence just after sunrise. It circled my pond once, then my hayfield, then the roof of my house. I stepped onto the porch and watched it disappear toward Cedar Hollow. The second drone arrived that evening. It flew lower, slow enough for me to read the manufacturer's logo before it climbed away over the trees. By the end of the week, I'd counted 6 separate flights, always following nearly identical paths, always lingering over buildings instead of open pasture. That wasn't recreational flying. Someone had programmed survey routes. I called the FAA regional office and asked a simple question. If someone repeatedly flies drones over private agricultural property, what records exist? The representative explained that commercial operations often required flight documentation, depending on the circumstances. Interesting. Very interesting. The next morning brought something even stranger. As I repaired a fence near the timberline, movement caught my eye. 2 men wearing reflective safety vests stepped from the trees carrying survey poles and GPS equipment. They weren't on my property, not yet. They walked the narrow strip of county right-of-way beside my eastern fence, stopping every 50 yards to place temporary markers. I climbed into my pickup and drove to meet them. Morning. Neither man smiled. We're conducting measurements. For who? Private client. What are you measuring? One checked his clipboard. Boundary verification. I pointed toward the rusted survey monument less than 20 feet away. The county already verified that boundary. We're conducting our own. On county land? He hesitated. Adjacent property. Cedar Hollow? Neither answered. Instead, they gathered their equipment with surprising speed. We're finished here. You've been here 6 minutes. We have what we need. They loaded everything into a white pickup bearing magnetic company logos that hadn't been there when I'd first seen the truck. Temporary signs, easy to remove, harder to identify. As they drove away, I photographed the rear license plate. Back inside my workshop, I transferred every photo and video from the week onto 2 encrypted hard drives. One stayed locked in my safe. The other went into a fireproof case. Old habits die hard. Late that afternoon, Daniel called again. I ran those survey company plates, and they're registered to a legitimate engineering firm. That sounds normal. It would be. He paused. They've never been hired by Cedar Hollow. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. If the company wasn't hired, then somebody may be pretending to work for them. Before I could answer, motion flashed across my security monitor. Another drone. Lower than ever. It hovered directly above my equipment barn for nearly 30 seconds before slowly turning toward the pond. I zoomed in on the live camera feed. There was something attached beneath it. Not just a camera, another device. Small, rectangular, purpose unknown. The drone lingered over my property for one final pass before disappearing beyond the subdivision. I stared at the frozen image on my monitor. This wasn't curiosity anymore. Someone wasn't just watching my farm. They were mapping it. I replayed the security footage 3 times. The drone flew the exact same route each morning, pausing over my equipment barn, circling my pond, drifting across my hayfield, then climbing just high enough to disappear behind Cedar Hollow's rooftops. It wasn't wandering. It was following a programmed survey pattern. I exported every video file, added timestamps, and backed them up with the rest of my evidence. Then I waited. Whoever was flying that drone had become comfortable. Comfortable people made mistakes. 3 days later, Wyoming's summer weather changed without much warning. Heavy clouds rolled over the foothills, and by late afternoon, wind pushed across the pasture hard enough to send dust swirling through the gate entrance. I was closing the barn doors when I heard it. A faint electric buzz. The drone appeared from the east, flying lower than I'd ever seen before. It crossed my fence, made one slow pass over the cattle pens, turned toward the pond. Then the wind shifted. Hard. The drone wobbled, corrected once, twice. The third gust shoved it sideways into the top branches of an old cottonwood beside the hayfield. Plastic snapped. The aircraft tumbled through the limbs before crashing into the grass with a dull thud. By the time I reached it, the propellers had stopped spinning. I didn't touch anything immediately. Instead, I photographed the crash site from every angle. Position, damage, GPS coordinates. Years of investigations had taught me that collecting evidence properly mattered just as much as finding it. Only then did I pick it up. The drone carried a commercial-grade camera mounted beneath the frame. Attached beside it was another module, a compact laser rangefinder. Not a hobbyist's toy. Survey equipment. Back inside my workshop, I placed the drone on a clean workbench and removed the memory card. My laptop recognized it immediately. Hundreds of files appeared. Video, still photographs, flight logs, coordinate data. The earliest recordings dated back nearly 6 weeks. Every flight followed nearly identical routes over my property. Every structure had been photographed repeatedly. My barns, fuel tanks, water lines, equipment sheds, fence gates, even the gravel turnaround beside my workshop. Someone had built a detailed visual inventory of my ranch. I opened another folder. This one wasn't labeled with flight numbers. It simply read, Project Phase 2. Inside were presentation slides, professional ones, company logos, engineering renderings. The first page displayed a familiar name, Stone River Communities. The second page froze me in my chair. A full-color development map stretched across the screen. Cedar Hollow Estates occupied the eastern side. My ranch occupied the west, except according to this drawing, it didn't. The subdivision continued directly across my pasture. Roads crossed my cattle fields. Luxury homes stood where my barn now sat. Walking trails wound through my timberline. A private clubhouse overlooked my pond. The final rendering even renamed the water. Mercer Pond had become Cedar Lake. I kept scrolling. Budget estimates, construction schedules, marketing artwork, utility extensions. Everything had already been planned. Then I found a page titled Remaining Acquisition Strategy. Beneath it sat a single bullet point highlighted in red. Current owner expected to remain non-compliant. Alternative acquisition strategies available. I leaned back slowly. So that was it. The fake inspections, the surveillance, the survey crews, the drones. None of it had anything to do with community safety. They were gathering intelligence before trying to acquire my land. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Sheriff Daniel Brooks stepped into the workshop after I'd called him 20 minutes earlier. You sound like you found something. I think I found everything. He spent nearly half an hour reviewing the files without saying a word. When he finally looked away from the screen, the calm expression I'd known for years had disappeared. This isn't an HOA acting alone. I figured. This is developer planning. He zoomed in on the acquisition slide. They've invested too much money in these plans. You think they'll stop? Daniel met my eyes. No. He closed the laptop carefully, I think they're just getting started. As he spoke, my security monitor chimed. Another motion alert. A second drone had appeared over the eastern fence. Whoever had lost the first one hadn't given up. They were already sending another. I watched the live feed as the replacement drone hovered over my eastern fence before turning away. It never crossed onto my property. Whoever was operating it had learned from the last crash. They were adapting. So was I. Sheriff Daniel Brooks closed my laptop and pointed toward the recovered drone sitting on the workbench. Don't release any of this yet. You think they'll destroy evidence? I think they'll change tactics the second they know what you've found. That afternoon, he logged the drone into county evidence as recovered abandoned property while allowing me to retain copies of every file. Nothing about the process was dramatic. Chain of custody mattered far more than headlines. By evening, my phone rang from an unfamiliar Wyoming number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Mr. Mercer? Speaking. My name is Noah Pierce. The voice hesitated. I used to supervise security at Cedar Hollow. Used to. Past tense. I think we need to talk. About what? Not over the phone. He suggested a truck stop cafe 20 miles outside town, somewhere neither of us would be recognized by homeowners from Cedar Hollow. The next morning I arrived early. Noah walked in wearing jeans, work boots, and the tired expression of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. He looked over both shoulders before sitting down. I quit yesterday, I guessed. They'll probably tell everyone I was fired. Were you? No. He slid a folded envelope across the table. I kept copies. Inside were daily security assignment sheets. Everyone listed my address, patrol schedules, photography instructions, shift changes, vehicle numbers. None of the other neighboring ranches appeared anywhere in the records. Only mine. Why me? I asked. He exhaled slowly. Because you wouldn't sell. I was never asked. Exactly. That answer lingered between us. Noah took another sip of coffee before continuing. Most homeowners thought security existed to patrol the subdivision. It doesn't? It does, but every week we received separate assignments involving your ranch. He rubbed a hand across his forehead. We were told to photograph equipment, livestock, water access, gates, fences, anything that might become useful later. Useful to who? He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said 2 words. Stone River, the developer. I kept my expression neutral. What did they tell you? Only that your property complicated the expansion plans. I've seen those plans. His eyes widened. You found them? I found more than they expected me to. For the first time since sitting down, Noah seemed almost relieved. I thought I was the only one who knew. He leaned closer. You need to understand something. I'm listening. The surveillance wasn't the real operation. My attention sharpened. What was? They wanted leverage. What kind? Anything that could pressure you into selling. He described supervisors discussing code complaints, anonymous reports, carefully framed photographs, and repeated inspections designed to create the appearance that my ranch posed risks to Cedar Hollow. None of it had happened yet. They had simply been preparing. Did Vanessa Caldwell know? A humorless laugh escaped him. She approved every special assignment. That confirmed what I'd suspected from the beginning. This wasn't a few overeager security guards. It reached the top. Noah pushed a flash drive across the table. I copied internal emails before I resigned. You know this could cost you. It already has. He looked toward the cafe window before lowering his voice again. I didn't leave because of the surveillance. Then why? His face tightened. Because last week I overheard a meeting. What meeting? They weren't talking about taking pictures anymore. He swallowed hard. They were discussing environmental complaints. My pulse slowed. People rarely invented environmental violations unless they planned to manufacture evidence. What kind of complaints? I don't know. They stopped talking when I walked in. He stood from the booth. I've already said more than I should. You could testify if it comes to that. He nodded once. I will. Before leaving, Noah stopped beside the table. Oh, one more thing. I looked up. The people flying those drones? Yes? They're not the ones making the decisions. He paused just long enough for the words to settle. The worst part of their plan hasn't happened yet. Then he walked out the cafe door, leaving the flash drive on the table. I stared at it for several seconds before picking it up. Something told me the evidence inside wasn't what would keep me awake that night. It was whatever Noah had been too afraid to say. Back at the ranch, I plugged the flash drive into an offline laptop. The folders were neatly organized. Patrol schedules, internal emails, security assignments. Several messages came directly from Vanessa Caldwell's office, instructing supervisors to continue documenting the Mercer property and maintain visual records of all structures, equipment, and water access. None of that surprised me anymore. One email did. It wasn't addressed to security. It had been forwarded accidentally into one of Noah's folders. The subject line read, Environmental Strategy Discussion. The body had been deleted. Only a calendar invitation remained. No location. No agenda. Just 4 attendees from Stone River Communities and 2 members of the Cedar Hollow Board. It was enough to tell me Noah hadn't imagined the meeting. Something had been planned. I forwarded copies to Sheriff Daniel Brooks and locked the originals away. Within an hour, Daniel called. Good work. You found something? I found enough to justify paying closer attention. What does that mean? It means don't interfere if they make another move. I frowned. You want me to let them? I want them to commit the mistake we can actually prove. That wasn't easy advice to hear. But he was right. Trespassing could be denied. Intent was harder to prove. Evidence caught in real time was different. The next morning, I drove into town and bought 6 additional trail cameras with infrared recording, long-life batteries, and wireless alerts. By sunset, they were mounted around my eastern fence, the creek crossing, the old maintenance trail, and every vehicle entrance onto the ranch. None pointed toward Cedar Hollow. Everyone watched my own property. If someone crossed the line, the cameras would show exactly where, when, and how. For almost a week, nothing happened. The drones disappeared. Security patrols became less frequent. Even Vanessa Caldwell seemed to vanish. The quiet bothered me more than the surveillance ever had. Organizations rarely stopped investing effort unless they were preparing something else. Then, just after 11 on a moonless Thursday night, my phone vibrated across the bedside table. Motion alert. Camera 4. The creek. I opened the live feed. 3 pickup trucks rolled slowly through the trees with their headlights off. They weren't using my main gate. They had entered through an old maintenance trail that crossed county land before reaching my eastern boundary. 4 men climbed out. None wore reflective vests this time. Instead, they carried flashlights with red lenses and unloaded several sealed blue barrels from the truck beds. I immediately called Sheriff Brooks. He answered before the second ring. I'm watching them, so am I. Units are on standby. You want me to meet them? No. His voice remained calm. Keep recording. The men worked quickly. One unfolded a shovel. Another pointed toward the creek bank. The third checked something on a tablet before nodding. Even without sound, their intentions were obvious. They had chosen the narrow stream feeding directly into my ranch pond. If hazardous material ended up there, investigators would naturally trace the contamination back to my property. Exactly the kind of environmental disaster capable of destroying both a ranch and its owner's reputation. The cameras captured everything: faces, vehicles, license plates, timestamps. One man struggled while dragging a barrel toward the bank. It slipped from his grip, striking a rock with a loud metallic clang that echoed through the valley. Every head turned. One of them whispered something urgently. Another swept his flashlight across the trees. For several long seconds, they stood perfectly still. Then my phone buzzed again. Another alert. Camera 6. The Western Trail, Sheriff Brooks's deputies had arrived without lights, positioning themselves well outside the suspect's view. Daniel wasn't rushing in. He was letting the cameras continue. One of the contractors suddenly pointed toward the darkness. "I think somebody's here." Even from the grainy night footage, I could see panic spread through the group. Forget the barrels, forget the tools. They abandoned everything where it sat and sprinted back toward the trucks. Engines roared. Gravel sprayed. Within seconds, they disappeared into the darkness. Only the abandoned barrels remained beside my creek. 20 minutes later, deputies entered the scene with body cameras already recording. No one touched the containers until state environmental investigators arrived. Every step followed procedure. Every photograph was logged. Every item was documented. Sheriff Brooks walked over to me as technicians finished marking the evidence. "You did exactly what you were supposed to. I almost went down there." "I know." He looked toward the sealed barrels. "If you had confronted them, this would have become your word against theirs." He nodded toward the investigators. "Now it's evidence." As the first laboratory team carefully loaded the barrels onto county trailers, one deputy approached Daniel carrying a clipboard. "Sheriff, you'll want to see this." Daniel read the document for only a few seconds before looking at me. "They left something behind." "What is it?" "A delivery manifest." He folded the paper carefully into an evidence sleeve, and it has a company name on it. I looked at Sheriff Brooks. "Stone River?" He shook his head. "Worse." He turned the evidence bag toward me. Printed across the top of the delivery manifest was the name of a licensed environmental transport company based nearly 200 miles away. The paperwork listed barrel quantities, pickup times, and a disposal destination. But one line had been crossed out by hand. The revised delivery location was nothing more than GPS coordinates. My creek. Daniel slipped the manifest back into the evidence bag. "Someone altered this after it left the company. Can you prove it?" "We'll find out." For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the balance shifting. Not because we had won, because they had finally left fingerprints. The following morning, I met Daniel at the county administration building, where attorney Rachel Collins was already waiting with several deed books, survey maps, and a laptop covered in sticky notes. She stood as I walked in. "Ethan Mercer? That's me. I'm Rachel Collins." She shook my hand firmly. "Daniel says you've been documenting everything." "I have." "Good." She smiled faintly. "Most property cases are lost because people rely on memories." I placed my folders on the conference table. "These rely on timestamps. For nearly 3 hours we reviewed every photograph, security recording, drone file, inspection document, patrol log, and email Noah Pierce had provided. Rachel organized them into separate categories: fraudulent documents, trespassing, surveillance, potential environmental crimes, developer communications. Nothing stayed mixed together. "Jurors understand stories," she explained. "They struggle with chaos." As she built the timeline across the conference room wall, something unexpected appeared. Several events happened on the same days. Drone flights, security inspections, survey crews, developer planning meetings. Rachel circled each date with a red marker. They weren't acting independently. They were coordinating. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Just before lunch, another visitor arrived. A young man in work boots stepped cautiously into the room carrying a cardboard document tube. I was told to ask for Sheriff Brooks. Daniel stood. Miles Bennett? The man nodded. I work for Stone River Communities. Rachel and I exchanged a quick glance. Miles looked nervous enough to leave at any moment. I heard investigators were asking questions. Daniel gestured toward an empty chair. We are. Miles remained standing. I wasn't part of any of this. No one's accusing you. He took a slow breath. I designed drainage systems. He removed several oversized engineering drawings from the tube and spread them across the table. One glance told me these weren't the plans I'd recovered from the crashed drone. These were newer, more detailed. Rachel leaned forward. Where did you get these? I helped revise them. His voice dropped. I didn't understand what I was working on until I compared the county parcel numbers. He pointed toward the western edge of the drawings. My ranch. Every acre. Every structure. Even my pond. It was already included. I looked up. They assigned parcel numbers they didn't own. Miles nodded. They treated your land like it had already been purchased. Rachel immediately photographed every sheet. Did management know? They approved every revision. He swallowed hard before opening his backpack. I brought something else. This time he produced printed email chains, internal correspondence between executives, several names repeated throughout the documents. Project managers, corporate attorneys, board representatives from Cedar Hollow. One message stopped everyone. Mercer remains unwilling to cooperate. Continue alternative acquisition strategy until ownership obstacle is resolved. No purchase offer, no negotiation, just obstacle. Daniel quietly read the sentence twice. Rachel highlighted it in yellow. They've connected the developer directly to the HOA. Miles nodded again. I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't seen it. Why come forward now? I asked. He looked directly at me. Because my grandfather lost his ranch the same way. Silence filled the room. Not one of us spoke for several seconds. Rachel carefully stacked the engineering plans beside the drone files. The fake inspection papers. She tapped them once. Weren't the beginning. She pointed toward the engineering drawings. They were one piece of a much larger operation. Daniel folded his arms. We finally have the paper trail. Miles gathered his empty document tube. I've told you everything I know. Before leaving, he hesitated at the doorway. There are still people inside Stone River who think this plan can be saved. The room fell quiet again after he left. Rachel slowly closed the last binder. We know how they built the conspiracy. She looked at Daniel. What we don't know is who else signed on to it. Rachel's words stayed with me as I drove back to the ranch. For weeks, every day had brought another confrontation, another drone, another security patrol. Then, almost overnight, everything stopped. The white security carts disappeared from the county road. No drones crossed my pasture. No survey crews lingered near the fence. Even the black SUV Vanessa Caldwell favored was nowhere to be seen. The silence should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt rehearsed. Organizations under pressure rarely became quiet because they had given up. They became quiet because someone had told them to stop talking. 3 days later, Sheriff Brooks called. They've lawyered up. I expected that. You should also know the state environmental lab finished testing those barrels. I waited. They contained industrial solvents. So Noah was right. He was. Daniel paused. If those barrels had ended up in your creek, every contaminated sample would have been traced back to your ranch before anyone looked elsewhere. Exactly as I'd feared. The plan had never been to pollute the land. The plan had been to make me look responsible. That afternoon, I checked the property one fence line at a time. Nothing appeared out of place. No tire tracks, no broken gates, no footprints crossing the pasture. Yet something else caught my attention. Several homeowners stood outside Cedar Hollow's entrance talking in small groups, not casually, nervously. As my pickup rolled past, the conversations stopped. One older couple looked away. Another man stared at the ground. Whatever confidence the HOA leadership once projected had vanished. Rumors had started spreading. The following morning, Rachel called. We've received 3 anonymous emails. From who? No names. What do they say? Mostly the same thing. She opened one message. Board members were told the inspections were legal. Another. Security officers believed they were helping with wildfire prevention. Then a third. Several homeowners never knew your property wasn't inside the HOA. That surprised me. You think Vanessa misled her own residents? Rachel sighed. I think some of them wanted to believe her. By the weekend, Cedar Hollow's monthly board meeting had been canceled. No explanation, just a printed notice taped inside the community clubhouse window. Meeting postponed until further notice. Even more unusual, several contractors began removing temporary survey stakes from empty lots throughout Phase 2. Something was changing behind closed doors. Monday afternoon, I stopped for fuel at the only gas station outside town. As I walked back toward my truck, someone called my name. Mr. Mercer? A woman I'd never met stood beside a silver SUV. She looked around carefully before speaking. I live in Cedar Hollow. I waited. I don't want my name involved. I understand. She handed me a plain envelope. My husband served on one of the architectural committees. Inside were photocopies of HOA board agendas. Several meetings listed vague discussion items. Property integration, boundary harmonization, expansion, coordination. One page included handwritten notes in the margin. Need Mercer parcel before Phase 2 financing closes. I looked back up. Where did this come from? My husband resigned last month. Why? He finally realized what they were trying to do. Before I could ask another question, she climbed into her SUV. One sentence drifted through the open window before she drove away. Not everyone in Cedar Hollow agrees with Vanessa anymore. That evening, Rachel, Daniel, and I met again. The wall inside the conference room looked completely different now. Every new witness, every document, every photograph, every timeline. They all pointed toward the same conclusion. Daniel studied the growing evidence board. They're losing control. Rachel nodded. People inside the HOA are starting to protect themselves instead of protecting Vanessa. I looked across the table. So what's next? Daniel answered without hesitation. Now we wait. For what? The first person who decides saving themselves matters more than protecting everyone else. His phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Then he looked directly at Rachel and me. A slow smile crossed his face. I don't think we'll be waiting very long. Sheriff Brooks turned his phone toward Rachel and me. It's Noah. He answered on speaker. Noah? His voice came through strained but steady. They're shredding records. Where? Cedar Hollow's management office. When? Right now. Daniel was already reaching for his truck keys. Stay where you are. I can't. If they see me, you've done enough. Leave. The call ended. Within 15 minutes, Daniel had coordinated with state investigators already assigned to the environmental case. Because the investigation now involved suspected document fraud, environmental violations, and potential conspiracy, they moved quickly. Search warrant applications that had been prepared over the previous week were finalized and presented to a judge that afternoon. By sunset, they had signatures. The next morning, Cedar Hollow woke to flashing blue lights. I stayed outside the subdivision entrance. Rachel had advised me not to become part of the scene. "Let the investigators investigate," she'd said. So I watched from the county road as marked vehicles entered through the stone gates. Deputies carried evidence boxes inside the HOA office. State investigators headed toward the records room. A separate team drove directly to Stone River Community's regional office across town. This wasn't a raid built on suspicion. It was built on months of documents, photographs, witness statements, engineering plans, drone records, environmental evidence, and sworn affidavits. Everything fit together. By noon, Daniel called. They found what we expected. And they also found what we didn't. An hour later, Rachel spread photographs across the conference table. Recovered hard drives, financial ledgers, boxes of signed board minutes. One image immediately caught my attention. A folder labeled Phase 2 Acquisition. Inside were signed memoranda discussing my ranch by parcel number. Not one document mentioned negotiating with me. Instead, the pages outlined methods for increasing owner compliance pressure. Another file contained invoices for drone services. Every flight corresponded to the dates stored on the memory card I'd recovered after the crash. Rachel slid another document toward me. This came from Stone River. It was an internal payment authorization, security consulting, survey coordination, public relations. Each expense had been approved under the same project code. Project Phase 2. Daniel entered carrying another evidence folder. The delivery manifest wasn't an accident. He placed laboratory reports beside it. The barrels matched material scheduled for lawful disposal, so someone redirected them. Exactly. And we found emails discussing environmental enforcement as leverage. Rachel looked up sharply. They actually wrote that down? Daniel nodded once. Not directly. He handed us another printed email. One executive wrote, "Environmental complications may improve acquisition timing." No one at the table spoke. The sentence didn't need interpretation. By late afternoon, news had spread through Cedar Hollow. Residents gathered outside the clubhouse, asking questions board members could no longer answer. Several homeowners contacted investigators voluntarily. One admitted board packets had been distributed without supporting documents. Another confirmed Vanessa frequently insisted legal details were being handled privately. A former treasurer produced financial records showing HOA funds had paid invoices connected to outside surveillance. The wall protecting the conspiracy had begun collapsing from within. Then came the final break. Miles Bennett agreed to provide a sworn statement. So did Noah Pierce. Both testified before investigators under oath. Miles explained how engineering plans had included my ranch months before any ownership existed. Noah described surveillance orders, photography assignments, and repeated instructions to document every aspect of my property. Neither man exaggerated. Neither needed to. The documents supported every word. Late that evening, Daniel received confirmation from the district attorney. Formal criminal charges were being prepared. Forgery, conspiracy, criminal trespass, evidence tampering, environmental offenses, fraud-related violations. Stone River Communities immediately suspended several executives. Vanessa Caldwell released a short public statement blaming contractors, consultants, and former employees for isolated procedural mistakes. Rachel almost laughed when she read it. She just blamed everyone except herself. Daniel shook his head. The paper trail won't let her. As if proving his point, another investigator entered carrying one final binder recovered from Vanessa's office. Inside was a signed approval page. At the bottom, beneath every surveillance authorization, every special inspection request, and every expansion coordination meeting, appeared the same unmistakable signature: Vanessa Caldwell. Rachel quietly closed the binder. That's the signature the jury will remember. I looked through the conference room window toward the fading Wyoming sunset. For months, they'd used paperwork to make me look powerless. Now it was paperwork that would hold them accountable. The only thing left was the courtroom. It took 6 months before the case reached its final hearings. By then, Cedar Hollow Estates barely resembled the neighborhood that had spent weeks watching my ranch. Several board members had resigned. Stone River Communities had quietly suspended its Phase 2 expansion. The white security carts were gone. The clubhouse parking lot sat half empty. The confidence that once defined the HOA had disappeared long before the first witness took the stand. Judge Eleanor Hayes ran the courtroom with calm precision. She wasn't interested in speeches. She wanted evidence. Fortunately, evidence was the one thing we had in abundance. Rachel Collins built the case exactly the way she'd promised. Not around emotion, around documents. She began with the property records proving my ranch had never belonged to Cedar Hollow Estates. Next came the forged inspection packet Vanessa Caldwell had personally delivered to my gate. County officials testified that the documents had never been issued by their offices. The retired official whose signature appeared on the paperwork confirmed he hadn't signed anything connected to my property. Forgery was no longer an allegation. It was a fact. Then came the drone evidence. The recovered flight logs matched invoices seized from Stone River Communities. Engineering maps recovered from the crashed drone matched the plans Miles Bennett had turned over voluntarily. Miles testified with quiet confidence, explaining how executives had treated my ranch as if ownership had already been secured. When Rachel asked whether any legitimate purchase had ever occurred, his answer filled the courtroom. No. The room remained silent. Noah Pierce followed. He described security patrol schedules, surveillance assignments, and repeated instructions to document every gate, building, vehicle, and water source on my property. He never exaggerated. He simply confirmed what the records already showed. Sheriff Daniel Brooks presented the investigation's timeline. Every drone flight, every fake inspection, every survey crew, every surveillance report, every environmental document, every event fit together like pieces of the same puzzle. The final piece came from the state environmental investigators. Laboratory reports confirmed the abandoned barrels contained industrial solvents. The delivery manifest recovered beside my creek had been altered after leaving the licensed disposal company. Combined with internal emails discussing environmental complications as an acquisition strategy, the intent became impossible to ignore. Vanessa Caldwell eventually took the stand. She insisted the HOA had acted in good faith. She blamed consultants, contractors, former employees, even misunderstandings between neighboring properties. Rachel waited patiently until cross-examination. Then she placed a single binder in front of Vanessa. Inside were the approval forms recovered from the HOA office. Every surveillance request, every special inspection, every coordination meeting, every authorization, signed by the same person. Vanessa Caldwell. Rachel asked only one question. Is that your signature? Vanessa looked at the page for several long seconds. Finally, she answered quietly. Yes. Nothing more needed to be said. Judge Hayes issued her ruling several weeks later. The court found overwhelming evidence of coordinated fraud, unlawful surveillance, forged inspection documents, conspiracy involving property acquisition efforts, and multiple violations connected to the attempted environmental scheme. Criminal convictions followed for those directly responsible. Civil judgments required substantial financial compensation. Stone River Communities abandoned Phase 2 entirely and reached a settlement rather than continue litigation. Cedar Hollow Estates underwent court-supervised governance changes, with new leadership replacing the former board and stronger oversight imposed on future operations. No ruling could erase the months of pressure or restore the time I'd spent defending what was already mine. But it did something just as important. It restored the truth. Late that autumn, I walked the eastern fence one more time. The old barbed wire had been replaced with new steel fencing anchored by heavy cedar posts. Not because I feared another invasion, because good fences deserve proper care. Across the county road, Cedar Hollow looked different. Children rode bicycles through the neighborhood. Residents waved instead of staring. No security carts stopped outside my pasture. No cameras pointed toward my barns. Only cattle grazed quietly beside the pond that had almost become someone else's marketing brochure. I rested one hand on the top rail of the rebuilt fence and looked across the land I'd fought to protect. Winning hadn't come from raising my voice. It hadn't come from threats. It had come from patience, records, witnesses, and the simple refusal to surrender the truth. The strongest fence isn't built from steel or wire. It's built from lawful ownership, honest evidence, and the courage to stand your ground when someone powerful tells you that your land no longer belongs to you. That fence still stands. So do I.
If this story taught me anything, it's that a stronger defense isn't a louder voice or a bigger fight. It's knowing your right, keeping good records, and staying patient when someone tries to convince you that the two doesn't matter. Every photo, every document, every note I kept became part of the lesson the facts could finally speak for themselves. That's a lesson I don't think I ever forget, as it's one worth carrying into any challenge life puts in front of us. There's something special about caring for a piece of land you work hard to earn. It's never just about fences, deeds, or property lines. It's about responsibility, dignity, and leaving things a little better than you found them. Sometimes staying your ground simply means refusing to step away from what's right, even when the road gets long. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If you ever deal with an HOA, a difficult neighbor, or had to stand up for something that's rightfully yours, share your story in the comments. And if you believe patience and the truth are stronger than intimidation, type stand below. I really enjoy reading your experience. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-world HOA, rent, and land right story about quiet determination and earned trust, I'd be honored if you subscribe. Thanks for spending your time with me today, and I'll see you in the next story.